there really is hope and healing. And that, when we think about ourselves, how do we look at ourselves? Do we look at ourselves like, oh, I'm just choosing not to do something? I can't do that just because I'm choosing not to do it. Or do we look at it as, well, I don't really have the skills and I don't maybe have the support? If I look at that first piece, that puts a lot on me.
Welcome everyone to the Relaunch podcast. And I am so looking forward to this conversation. One, because when you get out of where you are, what you think are the shackles that are holding you back, and you break free, it's like freedom will come to you. Financial freedom, relationship freedom, freedom within yourself to just be. So good. Today I have Dr. Katona Linn. She is a passionate, how much do we love that? Passionate educational coach. She's a speaker and an author. Learning from her own personal experiences with childhood adversity and trauma, she is an outspoken advocate for holistic wellness and has dedicated her career to helping entrepreneurs, leaderships in schools, communities to develop safe, supportive, positive environments for all. Her unique set of skills in systems change, special education, school mental health, trauma-informed, and healing-centered practices reflect her experiences with over 26 years in the field. You are going to have so many great takeaways today. Her unique endeavors include a think tank with men serving life in prison. She wrote this great book, Shedding Lies, Living Beyond Childhood Trauma. So it's time. It's time right now to build resilience. And she's going to help us with that because she has found there is so much hope in healing. So Dr. Ann, welcome. I am so excited to be talking to you today. And there's so much to break down here. There's so much. Your career is just, it's incredible. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Hilary. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here too.
Well, so when we think about, where you have come, think tanks for people that are in prison for life, you think about the educational system, you think about your own experiences. And I always like to talk about the wise woman within us, right? 3HQ, head, heart, higher self, and that higher self, being able to tap into that. You've got so much wisdom, but we also know that wisdom grows as we get more and more experiences. Let's start with your significant relaunch that actually brought you to the point where we are today.
Yeah, well, I've had many of them, but the one
it's like a relaunch roller coaster, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a marathon. I think one of the biggest ones. I started my business really in 2018, and I was a state project director for Safe Schools, Healthy Students. And after coming off of that, working at the state, working with federal government, and just really, having all of that structure, and then making the decision to start my own business was a little scary. And I've been through so many things in my past, which, my book, I talk about all the childhood trauma and all of those things that alone gave me that hope that I knew that I was going to be able to get through whatever was going to come at me was going to be all great. And so specifically almost 4 years ago now, my husband and I, both self-employed, and this was 2019. So it was right before COVID. And in November of 2019, my husband, who does chimney restoration, he's kind of like he's like an engineer for chimneys and fireplaces. And he's like the guy. And so he's really good at what he does. And he fell 30 feet off of a roof.
No.
And, it was just unbelievable. He broke 7 vertebrae, 2 of them were burst, 16 ribs, just like chunks out of his ribs, clavicle. He had a sliced artery. His lungs collapsed. And amazingly, he did not have a scratch on him on the outside. We kind of joke, we can joke now that he was like a shaken snow globe, because everything on the inside, it looked all pretty on the outside, literally not a scratch. So that was kind of a crazy thing.
It's interesting that you're bringing this up, because I'm sure so many of us feel like the outside is not a direct reflection of what's going on the inside, right?
Yeah.
So at this time, so that I can get my timeline right, had you already decided to take that step from state to entrepreneurship, or did this come after your husband's fall?
I had already taken that step. So I was also still working with the state because I was a state project director for this 1-year grant. And I was contracting with them. So even though it was my business, I had a pretty good size, contract that I was doing with them. So that helped. And literally this happened just after that contract ended. So this big contract, good, consistent income coming in, and then this transition. And I'm like, oh, okay. And
kind of like, okay, really? I'm now on my own. So were you the primary caregiver of your husband?
Yes. So he was in the hospital for 34 days, and he gets out right before, literally 2 days before Christmas. Amazing. We were able to actually bring him home. And so I was managing all of his stuff, all of his care, handling people coming in our house, and also, trying to run my business at the same time. And it was like, oh my gosh, and luckily we had a good cushion. So I was able to really focus on him getting better. It's really fascinating, because a lot of times when I'm working with people, I find that they have something like what, a relaunch, a significant relaunch, where you've now had a couple significant relaunches where you went from having, your full-time jobs to all of a sudden you're going to be an entrepreneur, to having your husband fall off and really, 34 days in the hospital. And you're trying to figure it all out. You had a cushion, which is, great. You had a little bit of a nest egg, but at the same time, you're trying to say, like, okay, I need to focus, but my attention is not necessarily on my intention of growth, prosperity for my business, because I still have a caretaker duty. And it's interesting, because I had a business that I was, really launching at the same time my mom moved in with us and had her cancer, and she was living with us for 14 months. And I was juggling that. It gave me an out. Right. Again, my business was like a light at the end of the tunnel, at this dark tunnel that I knew I was going down. Did you feel a little bit of that as well? Like, how did you compartmentalize your husband and his recovery and your business and getting it off the ground? Yeah. I really, my brain, my upstairs part of my thinking brain wasn't on track. It was only focused on healing and also just taking care of myself. Because, again, there's so many things going on, and it's stressful, and, trying to communicate with everybody. So there were so many things, and I knew this was at a point in my life where I actually was able to ask for help, whereas I spent too many years not doing that because I had so much shame. And so just asking for help and accepting help from people was a huge thing. That was a big
How are you able to do that? How did you change from going from, I never asked for help to, okay, I have to ask for help right now?
Well, I had done a lot of work, in my early 30s.
I love that. This is like the third conversation around I'd done a lot of work. What does that mean to you? I'd done a lot of work.
Well, I really focused on my own healing. I did counseling. I was doing marathons. I was vegetarian at the time. And this was all before I met my husband. Yep. I was single for like 7 years. I was like, I need to just focus on healing myself. Not everyone has to do that, but it was powerful. Like I really got a lot done in that time.
Now,
So
you said you were single for 7 years. Was this is a second marriage?
no, I did not get married until I was 41.
Ah, okay. Now this is starting to make sense. So what caused you to take this 7-year journey
Mm.
to really look within? What was it like? What happened that you're like, wait a second, I need to focus on me?
Yeah, I actually had a business. I had a previous business.
Mhm.
It was a home health agency in Florida and providing services to children and adults in the community. So I had that, and things were going well, and I still felt really empty. So I went to like the singles retreat and just had some major breakthroughs and really decided I was going to do, I was going to make some changes in my life. And I was kind of curious to see if I could stop drinking. I'm like, let me see. I did. And then started having panic attacks. And I was like, what the heck is this?
Were you finding that now that you look back on it, were you drinking too much, or were you using it as a crutch? Why did you feel like, hey, this might be something I should look into?
Yeah, I looking back, it was calming my symptoms of, later I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, ADHD, anxiety, and so looking back, I realized that that's what it was. I was using it to self-medicate, and I wasn't addressing the root cause. And so that had so much shame on me because I didn't deal with that. It affected everything. It prevented me from being able to see the hopeful things in my life and to look for the positives, and I did. Like when I say this to people are like, I would have no idea that that's what was going on because I was really good at covering it up.
Yeah.
And
Aren't we both?
oh my gosh. It's like, let's make everything look good. And so, just kind of digging in, I call it debriding. I had to go in and really dig out
so good.
all the crap. And that took away that shame, and that just that time period really was a huge.
Dr. Ann, you talked about PTSD. What did you feel like was the root of the PTSD?
So when I was 4, had a car accident and went through the windshield face first. So they had to do plastic surgery. And then I was in the hospital for a week by myself at 4 years old, because back in the day, I'm a little older. They didn't allow families to be with you in the hospital. That's what this hospital policy was. And so, further re-traumatized me. And then when I got home, because society, it's like, oh, let's not talk about it and it'll go away. It didn't. And so I spent my entire life thinking something was wrong with me rather than looking at what happened to me. It's that kind of like fixed mindset.
Yeah, something was wrong with you. Is that because were you going through surgeries? What was happening? Was it that you were, did you get cut up? What was the real issue?
Yeah, I had 77 stitches on my face, so major, but that actually they only did one surgery and they did an amazing job. I had plastic surgery.
Right.
You couldn't tell.
Well, look at you right now, you're beautiful. And it's like nobody would ever have an idea about that, age 4. But it's interesting when you said about the 1 week where, at that time, family members couldn't stay. Very similar situation that, when you're young like that, you don't sometimes remember all the details. And age 2, I got very sick for about 6 months and I was in and out of the hospital and they wouldn't let my mom stay, but it was the social worker who thought my mom was causing my sickness because I would be fine in the hospital because they were giving me all this. I had a rare tropical disease that my mom had picked up in swimming when a lot of people were coming in and out. We lived in Hawaii. And a lot of the veterans and a lot of the, military were coming and swimming, and then she would swim and it lay dormant and then it ended up manifesting. And so they thought my mom was the root cause. So I have, I had that almost like you did, that abandonment, like, wait,
Oh,
I'm there, but nobody's around. And I don't even remember. And I had the near death experience where, they potentially, crossed over. And I say potentially because I still don't remember it specifically, may never. But
yeah.
when you talk about your experience, can you remember when you were 4? Do you remember the accident? Do you remember what happened? Can you remember any of that?
I remember details, which is how I wrote the book.
Age 4.
Literally, it's like a movie that has been, in any time after that when I was triggered. So I was triggered by being in a car that I wasn't with somebody I felt safe with, and thunderstorms. Those were the 2 triggers.
Wow, those are pretty big triggers given, you get storms all the time and given that you're in cars all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of would, my older sister, who's 8 years older than me, she was getting her driver's license and she had her permit, and my mom pulled over on the side of the road and was going to let her drive. I got out of the car and was walking down the road. There is no way. She is a brand new driver. That was kind of the big thing. So, most everybody else in my family, I felt okay with, at least, but yeah, no, I remember all the details of that. So, and every time I had a panic attack specifically related, like I literally, and I talk about that in my book. And so,
what was the main reason that you wrote the book?
I really wanted the book to be hopeful. There's so many things, COVID and, again, after my husband's accident, there were so many things that happened and so many miracles and so many incredible, hopeful things that, people were telling us, so you guys need to write a book. And I had already had people telling me that I should write a book about my story. And so I was like, all right, I guess this is kind of the time. And so just jumped in and, connected with lots of people, and I did self-publishing school and got coaching and just,
what's the biggest takeaway? I know you talk about building resilience and hope is in healing. What would you say are your biggest takeaways, biggest lessons that you really feel people listening today they need to hear?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that there really is hope and healing, and that, when we think about ourselves, how do we look at ourselves? Do we look at ourselves like, oh, I'm just choosing not to do something? I can't do that just because I'm choosing not to do it. Or do we look at it as, well, I don't really have the skills and I don't maybe have the support? If I look at that first piece, that puts a lot on me. And that really kind of creates a lot of shame. Whereas if I look at it as, all right, I don't have the skills to cope and I don't have the support, then I can do something about that. And so that's kind of where the hope comes in. And that's really that growth mindset, where if we really, think about people differently, we always want to look for the positive. Even, I'm not saying we ignore the negative things that happen. We have to deal with that. It's just, we have to deal with that and say, what are we going to do about it? We can't just act like things are happening to us. And I know you talk about this so much. So, it is interesting with the 3HQ, the head, the heart, the higher self. And a lot of times your head wants it. You got your steps, you got your processes, but your heart doesn't believe it. Yeah.
And then what happens? Success doesn't happen. And what do we find is the root? Like, you can't get into a 3HQ alignment, head, heart, higher self, if your head is not in the game, or if your heart isn't, and it's saying, that's all great. Those really lofty goals are really super, but no way can you do it.
Yeah.
And we do. And then how do you then tap into your higher self, the best version of you, and have the faith at that level to be able to do it? I'm giving everyone like, a rite of passage here that it's okay, because it happens to so many of us that we wonder, why can't we reach the success that we're going for? Why do you keep getting pulled back? And I love when you talk about hope in the healing of going back and saying, you know what? It's this, there's roots. And you're a doctor, and you have such wisdom around trauma and how it manifests later in your life. As you said, I had to finally deal with this for 7 years. Was there a reason that you became a doctor? Was that to help yourself, or
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I actually got into special education and became a behavior analyst because I was trying to figure myself out. I didn't necessarily know it at the time, though, and I think those of us who have been through stuff want to help others not go through it. That's another reason why I wrote the book is, there are too many people out there suffering, and I've seen so many of them. And so it's like, all right, let me get this out there to give some people hope, and then we can kind of go to the next level, and so, it's having that hope is such a key piece,
It really is. And I agree with you. There's, my book, Relaunch, Spark Your Heart to Ignite Your Life. And I often joke about it, but, being the queen of relaunches, I finally, this last month has been brutal for our family. It's been an onslaught with my own, tumor that ended up being benign, thank goodness, but just a lot of other things. And I keep looking up at, and I'm a God-loving woman, but I keep looking up and saying, God, enough with the relaunches, please. I feel like I've covered the gauntlet of them. Really, I'm good. I've got enough content to help people to, allow them to,
Too much content.
Yes, exactly. So we can stop now. If you're listening out there, universe, help me out here. Yeah. But for you, your book came out when?
Earlier in March of this year.
So just recently.
Yeah.
And, help us understand, are you putting together a course around it? Are you, what's the next step for you in your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah. So I help a lot of schools and the communities, and so that includes families and youth. So really kind of a big piece of my program is engaging them. And I'm also in the process of, because of the book, I've had so many people reaching out to me saying, oh my gosh, they want more. And so I'm going to be doing a book study and using that kind of as a platform to develop a program and to really walk any adult who's had kind of trauma through their life. And it's not a therapy. It's just looking at, how can you shift your mindset and using kind of more of those positive psychology aspects to be able to look at what can I do and how can I overcome without it being so scary. And,
so let's talk about that. The positive psychology. What would be an exercise that people that are listening right now, that they could actually go through it?
One of the first things I think of is just even looking at your strengths. What are your strengths and weaknesses? We don't often look at that. And how can we use our strengths to build on our, not necessarily, I don't even like to use the word weaknesses. It's what are my areas for growth? Because, it's, again, I think we can get pulled down by a weakness. And so, that's one example. Coming up with
that's a good one, because we have a retreat that's happening next week, and it's so fabulous because we already have a wait list for next year, which is just so great. But one of the things that I am pulling back in, and I do it every year, is the idea that, we have to get ourselves into a habit of positive thinking. For so many of us, it's around the negative. It's around the negative relaunches. Yet there's so many positive relaunches too.
Yeah.
So shifting your mindset to be able to go there, to recognize those, right? The I love this about myself. And people are like, I don't know, I got, a few, but I got a laundry list of things I don't like about myself.
Right. And we pay so much attention to those,
Those are the ones that stand out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so good. Can you give us one more?
Yeah. It's, again, kind of that reframing. So rather than thinking about that I'm just choosing not to do something or somebody else is choosing not to do something, it's let's look, do they actually even have the skills? Do they have the support? I'm not even looking at their motivation. I'm just looking at that piece. And when we look at that, that's where we can provide help or just help them to set goals that are going to be more attainable. Whereas if they're looking at, they're just, it's willpower. Why don't you just have willpower? And it's like, okay, let's look at these other factors because those are some things that we can change. And we all have outward behaviors. And these are kind of some of those inward behaviors that we don't always pay attention to. So it's helping to take those internal behaviors that we have, our self-talk, anything that's going on in our bodies, and making them more, having an awareness of them so that then we can do something about them rather than
absolutely. Once you can label it, once you have the awareness that, hey, it's there, then you can help yourself. That is so great. So how can people get in touch with you and find out more and get your book?
Yeah. So my website is www.katonalinnconsulting.com. And I'm really even in the process of adding things to it. And so you can sign up to be on my email list. And really, we're going to be launching early June for this, for the book study and also kind of a resilience coaching program. So keep an eye out and sign up for my email list. And I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. You can follow me on those as well.
Well, Dr. Ann, it's been a pleasure having you on. I am so excited for your future. And there is this spreading your wings and kind of jumping off the cliff when you launch that book. So kudos to you for making it happen. And so really great for everyone that's listening. If this is something that's really resonated with you, these types of conversations around relaunches, around impact, around inspiration, make sure that you click on the link that says subscribe so that you are informed when our next episode is coming out. And again, go check out Dr. Ann's website. They're in the show notes, all of the different places, and a link to get her book. So we look forward to seeing you next week. And for now, live now, love now, relaunch now, and get inspired by 3HQ and how it can impact your life and your business. Take care, everyone. We'll be back next week. If you like this video and want to get more like it, head over here.